I never realized that the brief period I spent at DePauw as a professor, as a young professor, will come back and prove to be so crucial, both in terms of my life and in terms of the cause for which I went to prison. The 7 years I spent here at DePauw from 1967 to 1975 really were remarkable years in retrospect. These were glorious years in terms of the generation of the 60s. And even though I was a young professor, I identified more with the students and I immersed myself in the student subculture of those years. And therefore, many of the youngsters that you will see here behind you, those three, including my wife, were all my students, but also my friends. And I was part of their groups. And they were part of my formation. They thought I taught them, but they actually taught me probably as much, if not more, than I taught them. So those years have proven to be very crucial in my formation, in my life. I ended up marrying a DePauw student who kept me honest all those years. Being a young radical is one thing, being a husband, falling back into conservative male culture of the Middle East was a hard thing because she kept reminding me of everything I said in class and and held me accountable. Oh, you told us this, you told us this. It was very hard to marry somebody who have seen you in your radical days trying to play any other role. But thankfully, I was very grateful that she kept me honest. And she has proven to be a strong supporter and a stalwart of wisdom and stamina. And if there's a real hero in this whole case, she is really the heroine. She and my daughter. And I'm thankful for the period I spent in DePauw. I'm thankful to the support I got from the faculty and the students. I'm grateful to Professor Calvert, the lead he took in making the student body and the faculty of DePauw aware of my case and keeping DePauw on the radar screen throughout. So that's also occasion to express my gratitude once more. And I will stop here and give you a chance to ask me because I can go on and on. The experience was so painful and so rich. And to say painful and rich is really an understatement. It was just overwhelming. So I want to put a limit to what I say in these opening remarks and give you the opportunity to raise anything you want to raise with me.
I would like to hear about.
Put your mic on the stand if that helps. You
Sure,
want to hold
it
it.
doesn't really.
You're going to get a very sore arm. That's all right. Try to improvise here. That's what medical education does for me. I wouldn't say that.
I would like to ask about your first few days as a free man again, and your re-entry into both the culture in Cairo and your few days here in the U.S. What has it been like to be reintroduced to freedom and all of that?
Well, you know, you take freedom for granted until you go to prison. We take so many things for granted until we lose them. And that applies in my case. I was in and out of prison 3 times in the last 3 years. I did not spend all 3 years in prison, only about 16 months. And every time I was released, I rediscovered freedom. So, and I appreciated it more than ever. And therefore, I was determined to hang on to every moment, every day of freedom, and to savor it, to enjoy it. to appreciate it, to see my loved ones, to be close to them, and to be close to my students, to my associates. The things you take for granted take a different meaning after you have been in prison. So I was very happy. I was trying to make sure that it is real, it is going to stay with me. When we finally restored our passports, my passports, and bought tickets to travel, I did not believe that I'm going to actually get out of the country until the plane took off. And even until the plane left the Egyptian airspace, I wasn't sure whether we will make it to the States. But we finally did, through London. Stopped in London, saw my son, whom I had not seen for some time. We spent 2 days in London. Again, gave me an opportunity to thank all my British supporters. There are so many of them on the continent. And then on to the States. We spent the last 3 days in Chicago. Again, saw a lot of the people and representatives of organizations that stood by us during the ordeal of the last 3 years. It was moving occasion to see all of these people who worked so hard and who gave us solidarity and who honored me even in absentia on so many occasions. And my family was so grateful to them. So it gave me a chance to express all of those feelings in the last 3 days in Chicago. And I'm doing it here in Greencastle, and I suppose I will continue to do it in every stop of this trip. We're going from here to Bloomington, where my mother-in-law is living now, and we will celebrate with her 80th birthday, and I will see other friends in Bloomington. And from that, I think I'm going to New York. Barbara is the one who's keeping the schedule. I hope I'm not messing it up in my mind. But anyhow, we'll have stop in New York and another one in Washington, D.C., and another in Houston, and a fifth in Seattle, Washington. That is my alma mater. In all of these places, again, I will see people who had stood by me during the ordeal. It feels great. It feels, can't describe it.
Professor, what's your take on the situation in the world right now? Obviously, there are a lot of focuses on the war right now. What will happen in the Middle East as the war ends? What is your take on current events, and what will be your role in talking about this now that you're a free man?
Well, the situation in the Middle East is a sad one, and there has been a sad situation for the last 40 years. We have had more wars and more violence on those 40 years than any other region in the world. If you are interested in statistics, the Middle East represents 10% of the world population, but it has appropriated something like 35% of the world armed conflicts in the last 50 years, i.e. after the Second World War. We had at least 15 million people who have died in these armed conflicts, double that many who were wounded or maimed, triple that many who have been displaced or misplaced or forcefully migrated and changed their homes. So the region is full of suffering, human suffering, material deprivation. And the war in Iraq came to add to this huge log of pain and human tragedies. However, there is an opportunity to rebuild a new Middle East that is more democratic and therefore more peaceful. I have, at least during my ordeal, and even before that, I have maintained that the only alternative to the likes of Saddam Hussein and the likes of Osama bin Laden is democracy. Only under democratic rule could we avoid the emergence or re-emergence of secular autocrats like Saddam Hussein or theocratic autocrats like Osama bin Laden. I still stand by this proposition and by this conviction, and I hope those who waged war that could have been avoided, but has already happened, I hope we can hold them accountable to their promises of building democracy in Iraq and promoting or helping Democrats elsewhere in the region. And I hope you, here in the United States, will help us to hold both the UK and the US accountable to the promises they made shortly before the war and during the war. I wish the war did not happen, but now that it happened, it created a fluid situation, giving opportunities to us and to people who wish us well to build new institutions, to establish new practices, to promote new values. You take freedom and democracy for granted. We don't. We have to fight for it, and I hope you never take yours for granted. And I hope you will help us create a new democratic and peaceful Middle East.
Do you think that the building of democracy in Egypt is less likely now, or since September 11th, and also since the commencement of the war on terrorism, and also with the Bush administration's new policy towards the Middle East?
Non-democratic forces in the area will always use every opportunity to delay democracy. But as I said a minute ago, now democracy is more urgent than ever before. If we are to avoid the appearance of the likes of Saddam Hussein and the likes of Osama bin Laden and Ayman Zawahiri and all of the names that you heard about since 9/11. I am maintaining that this is the only alternative to further wars, is to build democracies in the region. And even though the non-democratic forces will always find ways and reasons and excuses to delay the coming of democracy, we should push forward to build democracy.
To what extent do you think?
I think our people are ready for it. That's what you should know. Our people are ready for it. Our people are able to practice it. And don't listen to anyone who talks about clash of civilization or the fact that Islam is anti-democratic. This is nonsense. This cultural argument is nonsense. Islam does not prevent people from becoming democratic. After all, 3 or 4 of the huge or the biggest countries in the world are both Muslims and democratic. It's true, it is not a Westminster democracy, it is not an ideal democracy in Indonesia or in Bangladesh or in Turkey, but these countries are democratic, and it nullifies, invalidates the argument that somehow Islam is anti-democratic or it's not friendly to democracy. This argument we heard before 50, 60 years ago vis-a-vis the Japanese culture, vis-a-vis the German culture. In the 30s and 40s, that kind of argument was sometimes made, that somehow the Asians don't really, the Asian culture is antithetical to democracy. That Japan can never be a sustainable democracy. But 50 years later, Japan is still democratic. The same thing was said about Germany in the 20s and 30s. But today, Germany is enjoying democracy for the sixth decade, entering into its sixth decade. So what I'm saying is our people are ready, our culture is not against a Western type democracy, and we are determined. Few of us who believe in that are working for it, and I hope we'll get the support of people who are like-minded in the West.
Does the democratization of the Middle East preclude military force in your mind? Whereas it seems that the Bush administration believes that those same goals can be achieved with the application in some instances of military force.
I guess I did not get all of
Pardon me.
the question.
Do you think that the democratization of the Middle East precludes the use of military force?
Yes, yes. If you have a democratic regime, you don't have to resort to force. If you remember the great German philosopher Immanuel Kant, who said that democracies do not go to war with each other, because democracy by definition is conflict resolution by peaceful means. And if you get into that mindset internally, domestically, you are likely also to resort or to use the same mental arsenal in dealing with your neighbors in international and regional affairs. So you don't have to use force.
Are you, will you now still be involved in efforts with the ICDS and the organization from which you were involved in? When
That is my intention. I must tell you that after the acquittal, when we went to the premises of ICDS, we found it like a war zone, like no better than Baghdad on the 10th of April. Completely devastated, raided by the secret police, our computers all confiscated, our books, or most of it, were ruined, just like you hear about the museum in Baghdad. Looting and destruction and devastation was done vindictively by the secret police. So we have to rebuild the center, and I hope we'll be able to raise funds to rebuild it. But that's my intention, yes.
Does your imprisonment reconfirm or reinvigorate your convictions in creating maybe not ICDS, but maybe efforts to promote democracy in Egypt?
No, it has reinforced my conviction, and I hope that my health will enable me to continue my agenda and to do it even more vigorously.
How long will you stay in the U.S.?
At least one more month. We have appointments for medical checkup in Columbia Presbyterian in New York, and depending on what the doctors say, will determine how long I will stay.
Do you think that the establishment of a democratic state in Iraq really, as the Bush administration has said, will set a precedent for other countries to follow? And will that model be appropriate for all the surrounding countries?
Well, I hope it will work, and that's what I'm saying. We should hold President Bush and Prime Minister Tony Blair accountable. So even though we hated the fact that they went to war, but the fact they went to war, and despite the opposition worldwide, that is a fact. Now it is time to make the best out of it, and I'm saying there is a real opportunity. Whether the democracy that will be established in Iraq will be up to the standards that we all want is really secondary. The fact is to start the process, and I'm sure once the process starts, and once America and the UK and other Western powers sustain a sincere interest in seeing that the process will succeed, then there will be a spillover definitely in the neighboring countries, especially in Syria and Iran. So I'm hopeful. saying that hopefully it will work.
When you return, do you expect further intrusion by the secret police and the different functions?
I never rule it out. If you live in the third world, you cannot. It will be a luxury to rule out anything. So you just have to be on guard, and you have to keep caution in whatever you do.
You spoke briefly in your intro, if you will, about your experience here at DePauw. How do you think that was during the late 60s, early 70s, when student activism was very, lively is a good word. How do you think that influenced the way that you have practiced your own activism? How did that, you said it molded you a lot. What do you mean by that?
Well, you know, one thing, living in the United States, you acquire certain skills by osmosis, even without intending to, including organizing. And in those years, you know, we were organizing everything, for everything, from the women's movement, to the environment, to the race, black awareness, you know, and there were so many wars of national liberation at the time that we were involved in supporting. So having lived in those years gave me so many skills that I wasn't aware of until I went back to Egypt. So the values, the idealism of the 60s remained with me, but equally the organizational skills that go with that. And the two of them together helped me do a lot in the 10, 15 years following my return. And it is precisely that kind of effectiveness that made the regime in Egypt and other regimes in the Arab world quite alarmed by what I was doing. Even though it was peaceful, yet being so effective put them all on guard and made them realize that I'm dangerous. Actually, in retrospect, I am surprised that they tolerated me as long as they did.
We should let you get ready for your reception. I just have one final question. What would be your message to DePauw students today as they begin their lives and to the alumni who supported you?
Well, I have said in lectures and that I made after my acquittal and in a recent article that I used to teach my students here at DePauw in my social movement class to get involved, to be part of what's going on. And I also warned them not to expect involvement in social movements to be a picnic, that there will be a price that may have to be paid. And that all social movements in history were manned by young people like themselves, and therefore they ought to not to waste the opportunity to get involved. Never realized, however, that the price that people will pay will wait until the age of 60 in my case. So the script I was advising the students, so be prepared all your life to pay a price for whatever you believe in. And you'll never regret it. It is very fulfilling. It is rewarding. And that would be my message. Get involved and stay involved, even though you may have to pay some price.
Thank you very much.
Sure.